Yes. Hi, everyone, and a very warm welcome to today's discussion. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Manjesh Rana, and I serve as the Senior Program Officer for the International Election Observation Mission at the ANFREL. It's a pleasure to co moderate today's session with our friends at the Asia Democracy Network, ADN. As many of you know, South Korea's June 3 snap presidential election came at a critical time. It followed months of political instability, sparked by the controversial martial law declaration by former President Yoon Suk-yeol late last year, somewhere around December. At ANFREL, we have been closely monitoring these developments. The political breakdown following ex-President Yoon Suk-yeol martial law decree was first analyzed in issue number 16 of our data dive series, where we explored the rapid erosion of democratic safeguards, press freedom, and parliamentary effectiveness that led to the impeachment and South Korea's democratic reclassification as a flawed democracy. In our latest issue, issue number 19, we turned to the June 3 snap presidential elections, which was far more than a leadership transition. It became a national reckoning, a powerful act of civil resistance against authoritarian overreach, and a critical test of South Korea's democratic resilience. With a historic, nearly 80% voter turnout, the highest in decades, and a decisive victory for opposition leader Lee Jae-myung, who was sworn in the very next day, that is 4th of June, voters sent a clear signal: democracy in South Korea must not only endure but evolve. The outcome reflected a strong public demand for change, stronger institutions, democratic safeguards, and a reset after months of political uncertainty. The election also gave us a lot to think about. On one hand, we saw encouraging reforms like expanded overseas and shipboard voting, but on the other, persistent challenges remained, especially for voters with disabilities. Anfield believes that now is the moment to focus on long term reforms, limiting unchecked executive powers, improving accessibility, and rebuilding public trust in democratic institutions. We hope today's conversation helps us think through where South Korea and the region goes from here. Thank you.
Thank you, Rana, for that powerful overview. Hello, everyone. My sincere thanks to ANFREL for the opportunity to co-host this critical discussion. My name is Sue, and I'm the Senior Program Manager at the Asia Democracy Network. ADN is a regional network dedicated to defending, promoting, and advancing democratization and democratic governance at all levels of society through solidarity and cooperation among civil society organizations and democracy advocates across Asia. Recently, ADN and its members released the 2024 Democracy Overview, which you could download on our website. Through this report, we found that events which transpired in South Korea, the declaration of martial law, widespread polarization, and abuse of authority, are unfortunately not unique. They mirror a global trend of expanding autocratization fueled by populist rhetoric, disinformation, and the securitization of politics, a troubling phenomenon that confuses and alienates citizens from their sovereign rights and duties. We see similar situations in other parts of the region, including Thailand, Indonesia, and India. These countries, with their deeply rooted social, economic, and political divisions, tend to be exploited by certain segments seeking autocratic control. As a regional network advocating for democratic governance, ADN firmly believes that solutions to these challenges depend on open and human rights-centered governance and institutions. Without human rights at the core, corruption, draconian policies, and other forms of injustice will inevitably become commonplace. It is imperative, therefore, that we re-examine the strength of checks and balances within our democratic institutions. The South Korean legislature's swift response during the night of martial law, as well as the subsequent judicial processes against former President Yoon, powerfully demonstrates the vital importance of such mechanisms. Protecting democracy is not just about replacing leaders, but about entrenching a culture of justice, inclusion, transparency, and accountability. This is not the first time South Korea's democracy has been challenged. The country has a history marked by dictatorships and political chaos. What makes South Korea's democracy resilient, however, is its profound commitment to memorializing the value of democracy. If you visit South Korea, you will find a wide array of museums that vividly highlight the nation's democratic struggle. You will also witness a vibrant culture of daily protests. Pro-democracy narratives permeate even in pop culture, with movies like Parasite critiquing socioeconomic conditions and films like 1987 and Taxi Driver memorializing the democracy struggle. Pro-democracy narratives, as conveyed through novelists like Han Gang, are consistently passed down, ensuring that citizens never forget the experiences of the dark past and continually strive to implement corrective measures. This is precisely why demonstrations following the declaration of martial law were attended by such a diverse demographic. A robust culture of democracy is sustained, passed on to the next generation, and transcends divisions. We look forward to a session that reflects on these essential values and on how we can further advance democracy in Korea and beyond. Today's discussion provides an opportunity for us to reflect on what this means going forward. What reforms are necessary? How do we strengthen safeguards? How can regional solidarity and support ensure that gains in democratic integrity are not just protected, but deepened? We're honored to have two outstanding speakers with us today to help answer these questions and guide our reflection. So let's dive right in. So I'll go ahead and introduce our great speakers. Our first speaker is So-hee Yang. She is a South Korean political activist and social entrepreneur. Her bridges youth empowerment, democratic innovation, and gender equity. As founder of the Yunnan movement and co-founder of Valid think tank, she has built civic capacity among young Koreans while advancing inclusive policy agendas from grassroots to international platforms, including the UN and APEC. So-hee offers a unique lens on democratic participation in the digital age, combining on-the-ground experience in youth organizing with strategic policy expertise. Her work at the intersection of AI, participatory governance, and structural political reform provides insights into how emerging technologies can enhance rather than undermine inclusive democratic processes, particularly for our underrepresented voices like young people and women in politics. Our second speaker is Ms. Brisa Rosales, Executive Director of ANFREL, and she brings a regional perspective on democratic resilience and electoral integrity, drawing from her experience supporting civil society networks and election observation missions across Asia. So I'll go ahead and ask the first question to So-hee and Brisa. So let's begin with the broader picture. What does the outcome of the June 3rd snap presidential election reveal about the state of democracy in South Korea today? And what does it signal for its future trajectory? So-hee? I think you're on mute.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry again. And yeah, hi again. So thank you. And thanks for having me here. So despite the many threats and crises surrounding this early election, it ultimately reaffirmed that South Korea's democracy remains strong and resilient. To begin, let me briefly remind you why this election was held in the first place. It was triggered by the impeachment of former President Yoon Suk-yeol, who had attempted to declare an unconstitutional and undemocratic martial law, effectively committing insurrections. This was stopped through the collective strength of the citizens and democratic institutions in here, South Korea. So Yoon and his allies initially sought to justify the imposition of the martial law, and though they have since attempted to downplay the severity and illegality of their actions, this is not a method that can be brushed aside. So as noted in the Constitutional Court's ruling, it was only through strong civic resistance and the reluctance of some military officials to comply and the decisive loss of parliament and the court itself that a democratic breakdown was narrowly averted. So naturally, voters chose not to entrust power against the People Power Party, which had produced and defended Yoon's administration, and thus bears responsibility for the crisis. So one of the strengths of the South Korean democracy lies precisely in its ability to enable such a change in leadership. So that's the current president Lee Jae-myung did not win a majority of the votes. So nearly 40% of the electorate did not support him. So can we say that all of them condoned insurrection? Certainly not. So just as many could accept martial law, many could not accept the martial law, there is also a significant segment of the population who find it difficult to support President Lee. So this is why one of the key tasks of facing the new administration is national unity beyond political divisions.
Should I answer the same question? Yeah. Actually, thank you, Suhi. No, but from a regional vantage point, the outcome of South Korea, of course, the South Korea's snap election reflects both democratic maturity but also continued vulnerability, because the uh, not so high voter turnout, so even it is under polarized condition, somehow it signals strong public trust in the electoral processes, because the snap election was not just a procedural response to crisis, but we saw it as a constitutional mechanism that worked, something that we don't always see in other countries. So when talking about civic spaces, the outcome of the snap elections actually, it shows that countries with active and resilient civil society are more likely to withstand democratic shock. So South Korea still benefits from relatively, at least somehow, free media, empowered election commission, engaged electorate, and all of those are crucial for bouncing back. So looking ahead, actually what's crucial right now will be the institutional reforms, because the elections give South Korea an opportunity to re-legitimize the democratic norms. So it will only follow if deeper reforms will be institutionalized. Yeah.
Thank you, Biza, for providing the broader picture here, and thank you, Sohi, as well. My next question is more of like South Korean specific, and I'll be asking this to Sohi. So, South Korea saw a record voter turnout, like almost 80%, and widespread civic mobilization, and we believe that it was also largely led by women. So, even amid political instability. So, what do you think drove this level of public engagement? And how might it shape democratic participation going forward?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good question. And as you may know, South Korea has always been a politically dynamic country with a strong tradition of the bottom-up, grassroots democracy, and a real possibility of leadership change through elections. So most citizens understand the importance of the political participation and value it as a part of the country's democratic foundation. So when voter turnout dips, it often because people feel disillusioned or powerless, not because they are indifferent. So in this election, however, both sides had a clear and urgent motivation to show up at the polls. So what our team paid particular attention to was not only just the high turnout, but the evolving voting patterns among younger generations. So some analysts have voiced concern about the shift toward a far-right tendencies among the young voters, especially with the rise of new conservative factions rooted in the anti-feminist rhetoric, but we see it somewhat differently, because if you look closely, many of those young voters who supported this new conservative this time had actually voted for the third parties in the previous general election, parties that campaigned on the political generation and change rather than ideological loyalty. So from this perspective, these core demands may not be ideological but structural. They want generational renewal in politics. And in this election cycle, there was only one prominent figure and platform that seemed to represent their possibility. So we also saw a notable political awakening among younger people, especially women in their 20s and 30s, who previously might have been dismissed as politically disengaged. So the martial law crisis and impeachment process prompted many of them to find and use their political voices at a new level. So what's critical going forward is a sense of efficacy. People need to feel their participation really matters. And if this sense of impact is sustained, it could not only lead to continued voter engagement, but also inspire some to enter politics directly. So to make this possible, we maybe need a broader and more inclusive political spaces that reflects younger voices while also pushing the generational transformation. So yeah, that's precisely where our work at Valid comes in. We're building a movement to channel this momentum into long-term democratic strengths.
Thank you, Sohi. Just to add a little bit on that, and just to give a regional perspective as well, we also believe and we also saw that the youngsters or women, they have actually been at the forefront. They have
Yeah.
actually been the flag bearer, not just in South Korea, but in other countries as well. Like we witnessed this in Sri Lanka, where ANFREL observed two
Mm.
back-to-back elections. And Sri Lanka also went through a political and economic turmoil. And similar things have happened in Bangladesh as well. And
Mhm.
in India also, there were a few moments which were
Mhm.
primarily led by the youngsters. And
Mhm.
so I think that's one of the most beautiful aspects of democracy,
That's
especially
right.
in
Yeah. True.
yeah, especially in this part of the region.
Mhm. Mhm.
Over to you, Sue.
Thank you. Definitely giving space for youth to directly participate, very important. Breeza, I want to ask you a question. So, from a regional perspective, how does South Korea's recent democratic crisis and recovery compare to patterns we're seeing in other Asian democracies? Are there common risks or unique strengths?
Yeah, thank you. So actually, Sohi and Rana have highlighted already the participation of the youth and the different civil society organizations, and that's very important. And that's actually a wide regional pattern that we are seeing right now, especially with the young ones. They are more expressive, and at the same time, they are resistant to accept the status quo. But looking at the different perspective also, I would also like to highlight what we were seeing for the past at least 2 years in the region. Because with regard to South Korea's snap election, South Korea demonstrates a unique strength actually right now. So it actually says that effective institutions that are still responsive to civic pressure. And I would like to highlight the role of the Election Commission and the election management body, because we've seen that in Sri Lanka, in Bangladesh, just like recently in the Philippines. So the Election Commission's ability to organize a credible election after the mass protests, it will totally make a difference. Because talking about the role of the election management body, the election commission in Asia, just like what we are seeing in the pattern, so actually it speaks a lot with the legal framework that is available. So EMBs with financial and legal autonomy are far more resilient in this kind of crisis, and at the same time, holding a big election after the crisis and mass protests. So that would speak a lot of the difference that can happen after each election. So, apart from what happened in South Korea, we are also hoping that kind of election would also happen in Bangladesh, because we've seen last year a back-to-back elections, presidential and parliamentary elections in Sri Lanka. So actually, it's a demonstration of post-crisis election scenario right now, where we are seeing more transparency and inclusiveness, not only in the electoral processes, but those are relevant for lasting recovery. So, apart from the participation of the youth, civic engagement, and the role of the election management body in this kind of situation, I would also like to mention about the risk which are remained shared among different countries. So we've seen the patterns with regard to the problem on digital landscape, the disinformation, it's still there. Of course, the abuse of state resources in elections and the legal restrictions. So we also saw uh, that institutions like judiciary has been weaponized in some countries. In Philippines, for example, Talking about red tagging, it's still a problem right now, which is used to suppress dissent. So, with regard to the problems that we saw and the effective institutions that we saw in South Korea, so at least for this snap election, South Korea must guard against similar trends as it moves forward.
Thank you, Brisa, for highlighting the strengths, some of the positives, and also the potential risk which can somewhat damage the democracy in future. And just to move forward, I have another question to Sohi. So there has been strong public demand for institutional reform, particularly to limit executive overreach. And I think Brisa also kind of highlighted the need of institutional reform in the beginning. And she also highlighted the role of EMBs in, like, assuming the role of being a protector, especially when a democracy is going through a turmoil. So, what specific reforms do you believe are most urgent at this stage, and how can civil society help push them forward? Maybe Brisa can also add a little bit.
Yes, true. This is a very important and very urgent question here in South Korea too. Yeah, I agree that the curbing executive overreach is necessary. But however, from the standpoint of view, what is most urgent and fundamental, I would argue that electoral reform and the strengthening the democratic legitimacy of the National Assembly here in South Korea are quite critical for structural political reform in South Korea. So our political system is based on separation of powers. Rather than simply adjusting executive authority, a more sustainable approach is to reinforce the mechanism that hold the authority in check and yeah, chiefly. So the legislation. So to do that, we need to address the long-standing imbalances in our electoral system, which currently benefits from the only two major parties. So reforming the system to ensure greater proportionality would allow a wider range of interests and voices to be fairly represented in South Korea. So in addition, the current parliament is heavily based on the single-member districts, which often ties representatives to narrow regional interests. So at a time when Korea faces national-scale transformation tasks, we need more legislature elected around issue-based agendas, not only geographically. So to enable this, increasing the number of the National Assembly seats should be seriously considered. We also need to rethink how we elect presidents. The current winner-takes-all system here, South Korea, means a candidate can win the presidency by a margin of just just 0.1%, which undermines its broader legitimacy. So introducing a runoff voting system would empower voters to choose smaller parties without the fear of wasting their votes, and ultimately help elect the presidents with a stronger representative and consensus-based legitimacy. So in short, the internship antagonistic symbiosis between two major parties and the winner-take-all structure that sustain it must be dismantled through institutional reform if South Korean democracy is to should move forward.
Thanks, Sohi. You want to add anything, Brisa?
Yeah, probably talking about recommendation such as guardrails against executive overreach, because of course the over centralization of power and the bypassing the institutional checks. So that's something that South Korea should also address to strengthen the legislative review of decrees and using the emergency powers, um, strengthening the independent commissions. So that's something that reform can address. But also, I would also like to highlight the civic space and citizen oversight. So, of course, we are talking about the shrinking space for civil society organizations and at the same time the existence of citizen observers. So, it's primordially important also to establish those legal protections for different citizen observers. Actually, it's a hope for ANFREL that we can hopefully observe elections in a country like South Korea. So, something that we are looking forward. So, a reform creating that kind of participatory mechanisms would be very, very relevant, especially with the landscape right now.
Yes, Priza. And just to highlight ANFREL's latest data dive also highlights some important institutional reforms, and this is one of them.
Great. I'll go ahead and ask Breeza another question as well. And more broadly, what lessons from South Korea's democratic crisis and recovery do you think might be relevant for other democracies in Asia that are facing their own tests? And how can these lessons from inform future strategies for defending democratic institutions and norms across the region? And not only democratic countries, but even countries like Myanmar who they're saying that they're going to plan to have elections, and will they be free and fair? We don't know, but do countries like Myanmar have something that we could share from South Korea's experience?
Yeah, actually, probably two. But I already mentioned about the resilience of civil society, but I would like to highlight that part again because South Korea civic groups and youth-led movements like Suhi, they did not wait for the institutions to act. So they created that kind of momentum for reform. And that really matters because we've seen that in different countries. You've mentioned about Myanmar. So the difference is that South Korea has this institutional channels which is still intact. So that made the difference with regard to the resiliency of the civil society and the functions that they can still do with regard to the space available in that country. And at the same time, we've seen elections. The fact that the elections happened, it actually made again a difference because the fact that the South Korea's law and constitution allow the democratic reset through elections is that is very vital, and we've seen that in Sri Lanka as well. And talking about Bangladesh, we're hoping that we can see that kind of or we are hoping to see that the election should happen after the July uprising. So the fact that the election happened and there's a reset mechanism such as election, so it's something that very relevant for other democracies in Asia. But I would also like to point out about the issue and the relevance also of data transparency and safeguarding information integrity because we've seen South Korea using real-time vote tracking and transparency, that aligns with the different international standards. So other countries can learn from South Korea's electoral technology safeguards and at the same time digital tools which can create or at the same time which can inspire other countries to combat election disinformation. So yeah.
Yes, please. So this brings us to the last question of the discussion, and we also think that this question has also been already covered in the detailed answers given by both the speakers. But maybe if you have something new to add, so I'll just go ahead. And this question goes to both our speakers, Sohi and Riza. So as we look ahead, what do you believe is the most important ingredient for safeguarding democracy in times of political crisis, whether in South Korea or across the region?
Should I go first or
Maybe you can
Brisa?
go first. You can give the
Okay.
Korean perspective, and then Riza
That's a
can.
question.
Yes.
Go ahead, Suhi.
All right. So yes, I think one of the most crucial conditions for safeguarding democracy today is creating political structures and environments where diverse and often competing interests, particularly those shaped by the new challenges like AI and digital transformation, can all be fairly represented. Unfortunately, that is still far from nearly many democracy countries, including South Korea. So our National Assembly, for example, is still overwhelmingly male with average age of 55%, 55 half of the members come from the legal or other elite professional backgrounds, but they are not half of our population, of course, in here, South Korea. So yet they dominate the decision-making table. So the newly formed Lee Jae-myung administration, despite having emerged in the name of building a new era, new future, has not broken free from these institutional habits either. So what we urgently need are more representatives who are women from outside of the capital region, from the LGBTQ community, people with disability, and workers and so on. So without them, our democracy cannot claim to be truly representative. And ultimately, though, the most vital safeguard for democracy lies in the individual power of each citizen. So we live in the age of where many are losing faith and promising the limits of democracy. But I still remain optimistic about the democracy because the system at its core has built some belief in human potential. So we may make mistakes, but even repeat the errors of the past, but democracy also grants us the power to correct those mistakes and move forward. So it's a system that trusts people to learn, to act, and to grow. So to make democracy work, I think to realize its full value and effect, we need to more capable, compassionate, and engaged citizens in each country. So the belief is at the heart of everything I do here, and it's the goal that continues to guide my work.
Okay. To answer that question as well, so what is the most important ingredient? So I would say it is institutional integrity backed by civic courage because in South Korea, we've seen that citizen mobilization combined with functioning checks and balances. So that really worked, and it also enforces accountability. So looking at different countries across Asia, looking at post-election environment, we are seeing that where parliaments, for example, courts and election management bodies are independent. So democratic recovery is not only possible, it's sustainable. So it's a big factor when there's citizen mobilization, but the institutions are effective and functioning. So that would make a difference for all of that. So the lesson is that democracy survives when the public doesn't give up, and at the same time when institutions don't give in. So of course, courage alone is not enough. So it must be matched by the structural safeguards and international solidarity. Yeah. Thank you.
More power to the people. So,
Fantastic.
we don't see any questions from the audience. It's majorly, the same questions which we have already covered in the discussion. Other than that, there are just a few compliments and positive feedback from our viewers that the discussion has been very informative. I think all thanks to the two amazing speakers for keeping the discussion focused. And maybe we can just conclude the discussion now, Sue.
Okay, great. So thank you to our speakers and to all of you for being part of today's discussion. Clearly, this election wasn't it was more than just politics. It was about protecting democratic values. We hope the momentum continues. And thank you both for making time. Rana?
Absolutely. So at ANFREL, we believe this moment is a chance, not just to reflect, but to push forward real reforms, as highlighted by both the speakers. Thanks again to everyone who joined today, and we look forward to keeping this conversation going. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.